Well, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Sunday at 4 from Upper Trosnham Baptist Church. My name's Pastor Richard Miles, and once again today we're going to be looking at some of the things that are happening in the world and looking at what the Bible has to say about them. Now, what a week it's been, hasn't it? If we look at our political situation, we've had the Prime Minister being forced to step down, and we've now will have various different people who are going to be putting their names forward to become the new Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party. Quite a tumultuous week, as I say, in politics, and it's going to last for the next few weeks. At least it seems that way, doesn't it? But that's all happening against the background, as we said last week, of a situation in which there's a great deal of financial uncertainty. People are feeling, and rightly so, you can understand it, that the amount of money they're going to have is going to be less than they had to be able to spend on things they need, things like fuel, things like food, and things like that. And so there's concern, and as I say, understandable concern, that there won't be enough money. And so that's an issue that obviously the government will need to sort out, and I've got no doubt that over these next weeks the various candidates for leadership are going to talk about how they're going to do that, how we're suddenly going to get more money into our pockets for the things that we need. But as we mentioned last week, we can trust that God will supply our needs. And I'm not saying that just to sound glib or not to take the situation seriously, but I really do believe that we have a God who will supply all of our needs if we put our trust in him and what he's done for us through Jesus. And also last week we started looking at the Apostle Paul and the situation he's been in over his lifetime. There were some times when he didn't have enough, sometimes when he had loads, but he said that he was trusting at all times in the God who gives him strength. He says he knew what it was to be in need. He knew what it was to have plenty. And then he says he was content in all of those circumstances, all that happened. He found his contentment in God, and God being the one to provide his needs. But very often, when we talk about God providing our needs, it doesn't mean that money or food is just going to magically descend from heaven. There's no doubt about it that very often God will use other people to do that, to provide what is needed. And Paul here talks about the way that the church in Philippi had helped to supply his need. So I'm going to go back to Philippians chapter 4, and I'm going to read verses 14 to 18. Paul writes, "Yet it was good of you to share my troubles. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving, except you only. For even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. Not that I desire your gifts, what I desire is that more be credited to your account. I have received full payment and more than enough. I am amply supplied, now that I have received from Epaphroditus the gifts that you sent. They are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God." And so here is Paul, very grateful for the support, the financial support that he has received from these Philippian Christians. And the implication is there that they were being more generous than others that Paul had mentioned and Paul had visited in the past. The Philippians are the ones who had given when he was in need. And yet, even though Paul was saying that he was grateful to them, what he was grateful for more than anything else was their attitude towards giving. It wasn't the money itself necessarily, but the fact that they were willing to give. And the fact that they were willing to give was what would stand them in good stead in the future. The fact that they were willing to give was what, as Paul puts it here, more be credited to your account. In other words, if we're thinking about what God approves of and what God is pleased with, that will be it, that attitude of giving. And that attitude of giving more than the amount itself. Now, Paul here, we can see, was given all that he needed, the amount in full. But the point is this, that our generosity towards others is not based necessarily upon the amount that we can give, because we can be generous in giving a small amount if that's all that we have. If we have a larger amount, then we can be able to give more. But it's the attitude of the heart that is the important thing, the very fact that these people are willing to give. And speaking personally from experience too, my wife Anne-Marie and I have had a number of times over the years when things were difficult. And we have known people being very generous to us over those years when we haven't had enough necessarily. We have, yes, be able to say, God has provided all that we have needed. And yet that has often been because people have been generous. We've had people who've provided money for us. We've also had people who've done shopping for us on occasions when Anne-Marie and myself were not very well, and it would have been difficult for us to go out to the shop. It was before the days when you ordered online for delivery necessarily, but people did come. We were there in the place we were living, not feeling very well, and there was a knock on the door, and it was people that we knew, friends of ours who had been to the shops and got us some bags of shopping. And we were just so grateful for that attitude of heart, that attitude of being willing to give. And here's what Paul calls it here. He calls it a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God. And that's the most important thing of all, that the motivation for doing whatever it is that we do is that we do what is pleasing to God. If we're able to give towards others, yes, we want to see their financial needs met, and that is very important. And I suppose you could say that in one sense, we are doing it because we want to help other people, because in the words of Jesus, we are loving our neighbor as ourselves, and so we'll want to be generous. But on the other hand, the motivation should be to say, I want to do something that is acceptable to God. I want to do something which he considers to be a sacrifice pleasing to him. And so I want to speak to those of you this afternoon who are Christians, who have known something of God's love in your life. Just think of what Jesus has done for you, the way that he's brought you to know him, all that he went through, the sacrifice that he underwent for that. Surely in response to that, in response to what Jesus has done, you will then say, I'm going to then show my grateful thanks to God by showing generosity towards other people. And that is exactly, as I say, what happened to the Apostle Paul here in Philippi. And I'm sure that's what's happened through the work of many Christians. And I have to say as well, others who maybe are not people of faith at the moment. There are many people who are moved to be generous at this time. We're to be grateful for them as well. Because at this time, when there will be a great deal of need, there's no doubt about it, and some people will find themselves really struggling over these next weeks and months. Let's be those who say, Yes, we want to see the needs of people being met. And we are going to do what we can. We need to ask God to help us, to give us wisdom that we know what we can do. But in the end, our generosity is something which, yes, will be of great benefit to those who are in need. But ultimately, the generosity is a pleasing sacrifice to God. Well, thank you so much for watching, and may the Lord bless you all.